Chris, one of the questions that our audience members, we had actually a couple of audience members ask, is whether these skills are applicable to younger people. Like if you're working with adolescents or youth or even children who haven't fully emotionally developed, can we use these same skills, or do you need to make tweaks to them?
You can use the same. You can use the same skills. You
Okay.
can absolutely use the same skills. I mean, I mentioned earlier on in the one of the examples about the child having a tantrum in the supermarket. We've probably all, those of us that have been parents or even walking around the frozen food aisle, we've probably seen that at some point. Now, you're clearly with a 6-year-old who's having a tantrum, you're not going to be able to have a rational conversation. That's clear. But what we can do, we can number one, we can separate the person from the behaviour. Whilst it might be tempting, we can not say to the child, look, stop being stupid, you're being stupid, which is probably what many of us have done in our time. But what some of the things we can say, which talk to some of the listening skills, is look, you're not stupid. You're actually you're a clever little girl, you're a clever little boy. But what you've just done actually is not acceptable. So how was it that you did that? They're perfectly capable of answering a question. They do it all the time. You can use the listening skills. You can certainly use echoing with young people, and the emotional labelling is very strong with young and old, because very often what can manifest itself as anger. And I'm not, as I say, this isn't a trained psychology talk here, but what can manifest itself as anger quite often masks something else. People come across as angry when actually they might be frightened. And that can be applicable to young and old. So by labeling what we're seeing, it looks to me like you're really angry about something. And there may be a blow of emotion from young people or indeed older people. But by doing that, we give ourselves a chance to see what the underlying emotion is. No, I'm not angry. I'm actually terrified. Or it probably won't be as neatly packaged. But by using these skills, we are giving ourselves the best chance to get inside what's going on. So probably a long-winded way of saying, no, you don't need to tweak them. They're not all applicable all the time, but one or more of them will be.
Great. Chris, one of the questions that has come up a couple of times from our audience, and as somebody personally who believes that counseling can be extremely helpful, sometimes the solution we think we have for somebody is we just need to get them to counseling, and for whatever reason, that's not something that they want to do. And so how do we both deal with that urge internally when we really just want to get somebody into counseling, and then how do we deal with that in our interaction with the person?
No, it's a very good question, Kelly, and we're all there. I mean, I'm ex-law enforcement a while ago now, but those people who join those kind of institutions, emergency services, that ultimately your job is to help people. The church is a good example, charity work, NGOs. We are what could be called rescuers, and that's what we want to do. But there's a couple of things to remember. And number one is, one of the things that I've emphasized in both sessions is staying out of judgment, staying away from problem solving until we've earned the right to have an input into the problem solving. And that's that agreement that we enter into subconsciously with somebody when they are giving us permission to have that influence over their next step. Because if we try and impose it, even though we may think it's blindingly obvious what you need to do, what we're really doing there is looking at their situation through our window on the world. And that's what we're doing. And by practicing the active listening skills, we can move ourselves away from exactly that mistake. Because yes, it's tempting to fill the silence. Yes, it's tempting to tell somebody I've been through what you've been through. You need counselling. But that's us imposing our will on somebody else. Now, you may be right, but we haven't earned the right to make that judgment. So, and it takes practice. It really does. And we have to metaphorically sit on our hands, because the temptation can be enormous to do that. But we must do that, because it's breaking the golden rules of staying away from judgment and staying away from problem solving. And also, it's worth just pointing out, you need counselling, and that's counselling is it's one word, but it means many things. And in the context that you're using it there, I've assumed, and I could be wrong, but I've assumed that you're talking counselling with a big C, the actual going to somebody who is trained. But the very nature of using the active listening skills, of demonstrating empathy, of demonstrating and building trust and rapport, we are giving counselling, albeit it's written with a small c. But we are, because we are trying to get somebody to a position where they can decide whether it's appropriate to take the next step. Algae, encouraging external assistance and help. So practice those listening skills. Honestly, metaphorically, sit on your hands, and it's a difficult thing to do. Absolutely accept that, but don't be the problem solver until you're given the right to do so.
A good reminder for all of us. Chris, one of the questions that came in is, what happens if somebody, does these things, makes a genuine effort to be an active listener, to stay out of judgment, to be empathetic, and it doesn't work. It feels like, they're not making progress, or it's failing. What then?
Two things. If you're trying your best, that's all you can do. So caution against, and it sounds easy, in the conversation we're having, caution against that self-blame. Good mental fitness begins at home. If you're trying your best and you're dealing with someone, it's clearly not working, it's not your fault. It doesn't work with every single human being, and actually sometimes we don't get the chemistry. That's also true, and that can be for a number of reasons. It can be, it could be a demographic, it could be gender, it could be culture, it could be a religious affiliation, for example. It could be any number of things that we don't get the chemistry that we're looking for. In those circumstances, and that's happened to me, be emotionally mature enough to recognize that this isn't working. Go and talk to somebody else, whether it's another mental health first aider, whether it's somebody else you might just get a different perspective from. A good question always to ask ourselves is, am I the right person for this? What's my mental health and fitness like today? Where is my red dot today, as we talked about in the first session? I think we have to be grown up. We have to be honest. If this was a magic wand sprinkled with fairy dust, nobody would be suffering poor mental fitness. Unfortunately, that isn't the world we live in. If it's clearly not working, there's probably a reason why. I would say stick at it. But it may be that encouragement piece introduces somebody else into the mix that might have more traction. I won't call it success, because I don't like to talk about success and failure, but just might have more traction with that individual. But we are all individuals. We are all different. We all have a different window on the world. Sometimes we gel with people, sometimes we don't. But don't blame ourselves for trying. It's really important.
Thank you.